On the 18th of February, the sleepy town of Ash Grove buzzed with excitement. Emily Bennett and Mark Carlson were getting married, and for a place where not much ever happened, this wedding was the event of the year. White lilies lined the aisle of the local chapel, and fairy lights twinkled over rows of white chairs. Friends and family gathered, eyes glistening, as Emily stepped out in a satin gown that shimmered in the sunlight. She looked every bit the radiant bride, her smile stretching wide, her hands trembling slightly with emotion. Mark stood at the altar, tailored in a black tuxedo, every hair in place, exuding charm. His best man and childhood friend, Jason Whitmore, stood proudly beside him, exchanging subtle grins as the organ music swelled. Emily's heart fluttered as she walked toward the man she believed was her soulmate. Their eyes locked, and for a moment, the world outside that chapel ceased to exist. The ceremony was everything Emily had ever imagined. Their handwritten vows brought tears to the eyes of everyone in attendance. "I promise to love you even when the storm is stronger than the sun," Emily whispered, and Mark nodded, almost too eagerly. The reception that followed was nothing short of magical. Guests danced, laughed, and toasted to love. Emily watched from the head table as her new husband moved easily among their guests, charming her parents, helping her grandmother to her seat, sharing a private joke with Jason. She couldn't help but feel proud. She believed she had married the perfect man. But beneath Mark's polished smile and thoughtful gestures was a tightly guarded secret. His eyes lingered on Jason longer than they should have. Every time Jason laughed or placed a hand on his back, Mark's expression flickered with something unspoken, something that passed quickly and unnoticed by most. Emily didn't see it. Why would she? She was too focused on making memories. From their slow dance under the stars to the way he whispered forever against her ear, everything felt right. She believed this was the beginning of a life she'd dreamed about since she was a teenager. As the reception wound down, guests began to leave, hugging the newlyweds goodbye, giving one final wave before disappearing into the cool night. Emily and Mark posed for a few last photos, arms wrapped tightly around each other. When the photographer said, "One more," Mark kissed her forehead gently, camera ready as always. By the time they arrived at their honeymoon suite, Emily was exhausted but glowing. Rose petals lined the floor, a bottle of champagne chilled on the table. She turned to grab her overnight bag from the hall, unaware that in just a few minutes, the fairy tale she thought she was living would be torn apart in the most unthinkable way. Because behind every perfect day, some secrets wait for nightfall. Behind the polished tuxedo and practiced smile, Mark Carlson carried a secret he had spent years trying to suppress. The night of the wedding, while guests still danced and laughed in the banquet hall, Mark sat silently in the suite's bathroom, staring at his own reflection. The weight of his double life pressed heavy on his chest. He had done it. He had married Emily. He should have felt relief, freedom even, but instead a storm churned inside him. For years, Mark had struggled with feelings he refused to admit to himself, let alone to anyone else. Growing up in a conservative household in Tennessee, Mark had been taught that love only looked a certain way. So, when those feelings for Jason began in high school, he buried them deep. Jason was his best friend, the one person who knew him in ways no one else did. But even Jason hadn't anticipated how far things would eventually go. Their relationship had crossed a line years earlier during a summer trip to Nashville. One kiss, born out of curiosity and years of emotional closeness, had turned into something neither of them talked about afterward. But it didn't stop. Late-night calls, secret weekends, carefully guarded moments when no one was watching. Mark had convinced himself it wasn't real, that it was just confusion. And then came Emily. She was everything the world expected of a perfect wife, beautiful, kind, supportive. Mark saw in her the opportunity to set things right, to erase the parts of himself he didn't understand. He fell for her genuinely, or at least he believed he did. Maybe love could fix him. Maybe commitment could cure desire. Jason, however, wasn't so sure. When Mark asked him to be his best man, Jason hesitated. "Are you sure about this?" he had asked. "You don't have to marry her just to make everything look good." Mark had smiled tightly. "This is what I need." This is what's right. For all of us. Jason didn't press. After all, he loved Mark. Always had. Even if it was in a way he could never say out loud. And so he stood by Mark's side at the altar, silently pushing his feelings into the background, watching the man he loved promise himself to someone else. The night of the wedding was supposed to be the final page of their secret chapter. Mark had told Jason they needed to stop, that things had to change after tonight. But old habits don't break easily. As the guests filtered out and Emily slipped upstairs, Mark texted Jason, "Come up in 10. One last time." Jason stared at the message. His gut told him to walk away, but his heart wouldn't let him. So he climbed the stairs, unaware that Emily, glowing in her wedding gown, had forgotten her phone in the car and would return far sooner than expected. The truth wasn't buried. It was ticking. The ballroom had emptied, the last of the laughter echoing down the hotel corridors. Emily's heels clicked softly against the marbled floor as she made her way back to the suite, her heart light from a day of toasts, slow dances, and whispered promises. Still in her gown, with her curls pinned delicately and makeup slightly smudged from happy tears, she carried a bottle of champagne and 2 flutes, ready to share one final, private toast with her new husband. She had gone down to the lobby to retrieve her forgotten phone from the valet. Mark didn't know she was coming back early. She wanted to surprise him, to start their new chapter with laughter and kisses under dim lights, just the two of them. As she approached the suite, she noticed the door was slightly ajar. Her smile widened. Maybe he was already setting up something romantic, a bath, candles, maybe music. She pushed the door open quietly, stepping in with light feet. Then she heard it, a breathless moan, followed by a hushed, familiar voice. Mark's voice. Her smile faded. She moved toward the bedroom, the champagne bottle still clutched in her hand. What she saw through the narrow opening of the bedroom door stopped her heart cold. There, tangled in their freshly turned wedding sheets, were Mark and Jason. Her husband, still in his white dress shirt, knelt between Jason's legs, his best man, the man who had toasted their love just hours ago. Time froze. Emily's vision blurred, her breath caught in her throat. The champagne bottle slipped from her hand and crashed to the ground, shattering into shards and sending foam across the carpet. Mark jolted upright. Jason scrambled, eyes wide in terror. "Emily," Mark stammered, reaching for her. But she had already turned away, backing into the wall as if trying to disappear into it. Her body shook violently. Her mouth moved, but no words came out. Just silence. Just betrayal. The images burned into her mind. The dress shirt unbuttoned, the closeness, the raw intimacy not meant for her. "How long?" she whispered finally, her voice a jagged edge. "How long has this been going on?" Mark stepped forward, hands outstretched, but she recoiled as if he were a stranger. "It's not what it looks like." She let out a broken laugh, sharp and disbelieving. "Not what it looks like." Her eyes filled with tears. "On our wedding night, Mark?" Jason couldn't speak. He grabbed his jacket from the floor, muttered something unintelligible, and rushed out of the suite. Emily stood frozen. Her entire world, everything she had dreamed, built, and believed in, lay crumbling around her. The fairy tale had ended, not with happily ever after, but with a betrayal so deep it bled into every corner of her soul. And the storm inside her was just beginning. Emily stood frozen in the hallway long after Jason had fled. Her gown, once a symbol of joy, now clung to her like a cruel joke. The room buzzed with silence, deafening and dense. Mark's voice tried to reach her, soft, pleading, but it was no longer language she could understand. Her mind was cracking, piece by piece, beneath the weight of betrayal. Her heart pounded with an unnatural rhythm, and her breath came in short, sharp bursts. She felt hollow, and at the same time consumed, by rage, by humiliation, by something dark and primal that overrode reason. Without saying a word, she turned and walked out of the suite. Mark called after her, but she didn't stop. Her bare feet padded quickly down the plush hallway, the hem of her gown trailing behind her like a ghost. She didn't cry. Not yet. The tears hadn't earned their way through the fire building inside her. She descended a floor and turned into the quiet service corridor, one she'd wandered through earlier that week during a tour of the hotel. She remembered the narrow break room, the small staff kitchenette. No cameras, just a long metal counter, a sink, and a drawer near the fridge. She pulled it open with shaking hands. There it was, a sharp kitchen knife, 12 inches of polished steel. Her reflection in the blade startled her. Her eyes looked vacant, her face pale, her makeup smeared not from dancing, but devastation. Emily wrapped her fingers around the handle, gripping it tightly. The weight of it grounded her. With slow, deliberate steps, she walked back upstairs. Each click of her footsteps was fueled by everything Mark had stolen from her. Her dream of a family, of trust, of love. All of it felt like a carefully crafted lie, fed to her over years of planning and months of affection, just to end in betrayal on the very night it was supposed to begin. She reached the door and pushed it open. Mark was pacing inside, half-dressed and sweating, panic spreading across his face as he saw her. His eyes dropped to the knife. "Emily, what are you doing?" he whispered, his voice trembling. She said nothing. He took a cautious step forward. "Please. I can explain. I didn't mean to." "You didn't mean to?" Her voice was quiet, eerie in its calm. "You let me marry you knowing the truth. You looked me in the eyes, in front of everyone I love, and promised me forever." Mark tried to speak again, but his throat caught the words. "You chose him. On our wedding night," she said, her grip tightening. And then something inside her snapped. There was no scream, no dramatic cry, just a sudden lunge, the blur of white silk, and the glint of silver. The man she had once adored collapsed to the ground, blood soaking into the white carpet like spilled wine. Emily stood over him, her chest heaving. It was done. Jason didn't look back. He burst through the stairwell door, stumbling over the train of a bridesmaid's forgotten gown tossed carelessly in the hallway. His breath came in ragged gasps as he ran barefoot through the corridors, tuxedo shirt flapping open, tie lost somewhere between shame and panic. The echo of Emily's scream still rang in his ears, piercing, raw, unearthly. He had never heard anything like it, not even in his worst nightmares. Downstairs in the lobby, guests lingered in their gowns and suits, nursing champagne flutes and leftover slices of cake. The laughter was dying down, but the evening still held a gentle, glowing warmth, until the elevator dinged open and Jason exploded out of it like a man possessed. "Call 911, he shouted, breathless, his face pale with terror. "Call them now." For a few seconds, no one moved. Then a groomsman dropped his drink. A flower girl cried. A bridesmaid grabbed her phone and started dialing. Back upstairs, the suite had fallen into eerie silence. Emily knelt beside Mark's writhing body, blood pouring from the brutal wound between his legs. Her dress was soaked, the delicate lace now painted crimson, but her face betrayed nothing. No tears, no fear. Just a blank, cold stare. She pressed a towel to his side without much urgency, not to stop the bleeding, but almost out of reflex, as if part of her hadn't caught up to what she'd done. Mark tried to speak, choking on pain. His hand reached toward her, trembling. Emily didn't flinch. Her gaze flicked to the door. The staff was the first to arrive, housekeeping in uniforms, frozen in place. One let out a horrified gasp before rushing to call emergency services. The next few minutes passed in a frenzy. More staff appeared, followed by confused and then screaming guests, their joyous celebration unraveling in a spectacle of horror. Within moments, the hallway was filled with chaos. Phones flashed with emergency calls. Someone shouted for a medic. Others tried to steer children away. The faint buzz of the party downstairs had turned into the roar of disarray. When the paramedics stormed in, they found Emily still kneeling beside Mark, her hands stained red, the knife resting a few feet away on the floor. She didn't look up as they surrounded him. She didn't speak. She just stared at the blood smeared across the bouquet of rose petals that had been laid across the bed earlier that evening. The flashing red and blue lights from the emergency vehicles lit the hallway in flickering waves. Cameras from stunned guests began to flash. Whispers spread like wildfire. The bride who had danced so radiantly under the string lights only hours ago now sat motionless, her white gown soaked in her husband's blood. A fairy tale had turned into a tragedy, and the dream was over. By dawn, the fairy tale wedding had morphed into a nationwide headline. News vans swarmed the elegant, ivy-draped hotel where just hours ago, champagne had flowed freely and 2 lives had been joined in matrimony. Now, yellow police tape fluttered in the cold morning breeze, a grim ribbon cutting through the remnants of celebration. The town of Fairview, known more for its fall festivals and cozy coffee shops than grisly crime, was thrust into a spotlight it never asked for. Emily's mugshot, taken only hours after her arrest, hit the internet before the sun had fully risen. Disheveled, blood-spattered, and hollow-eyed, she looked nothing like the radiant bride who had glided down the aisle just the day before. Within minutes, it was shared thousands of times across social media, accompanied by an avalanche of hashtags. Hashtag wedding night horror. Hashtag groom betrayal. Hashtag bride snaps. Whispers turned into full-blown speculation. Some called her a monster, incapable of handling rejection. Others viewed her as a woman pushed beyond her limit, blindsided, humiliated, and broken. Old classmates, church friends, and co-workers who had celebrated her love story only yesterday now questioned everything they thought they knew about the couple. The biggest shock wasn't just the violence, it was the secret. Mark's hidden relationship with Jason unraveled in front of the town like a twisted ribbon. Close friends came forward with quiet confessions, odd moments they'd witnessed, suspicious closeness between the groom and his best man, awkward glances that now made far too much sense. Emily's family was devastated, not only by the act of violence, but by the betrayal. Her father refused to speak to the press, his grief etched into every line of his weathered face. Jason disappeared into seclusion. His family issued a single statement asking for privacy and healing. But the court of public opinion had already tried and convicted everyone involved. Businesses posted flyers asking people not to harass the Wexler or Stone families. Still, that didn't stop people from driving by Emily's parents' house, hoping to catch a glimpse, or digging through wedding photos online to spot signs, anything that might have hinted at the storm brewing behind those smiles. Emily's friends were torn. Some defended her. She was always level-headed, kind. One bridesmaid told a local reporter, "Whatever she saw, it must have broken her in a way none of us understand." Others couldn't forgive her. "Violence is violence," another friend said, wiping tears from her eyes. That wasn't justice. That was revenge. Church leaders preached sermons on truth, temptation, and mercy. Mental health professionals were invited onto morning talk shows to dissect Emily's psyche. And yet, through it all, the most chilling detail remained. How quickly love had turned into horror. What should have been a joyful union had instead become a cautionary tale. A wedding remembered not for vows or rings, but for the silence after the screams. The harsh clank of the jail cell door closing behind Emily echoed through the cold, sterile holding room. The weight of it was almost unbearable, her body slumping against the wall as she sank to the floor. She didn't resist when the police arrested her. Numbness had already overtaken her. Her eyes, devoid of any light, stared blankly ahead, the last remnants of her wedding dress clinging to her like a cruel reminder of the life she thought she would have. As the police took her in, Emily's mind raced, replaying every single detail of the past 24 hours, the moments of joy, the vows exchanged, and the night that shattered it all. What had gone wrong? She asked herself over and over, but the answer was always the same. The discovery, the betrayal, and the overwhelming, soul-crushing rage that had followed. Mark was rushed to the hospital in critical condition, his injuries severe. The surgical team worked frantically to save him, but doctors made it clear that his life hung in the balance. The woman he had promised to love for a lifetime was now the one who had nearly taken it from him. Emily couldn't even process the irony, how a wedding meant to bind them in eternal love had become the catalyst for such violence. As the hours passed in the small, cold cell, Emily's thoughts began to spiral. How could she have let this happen? The familiar memories of their time together, cuddled up on lazy weekends, laughing at shared inside jokes, planning their future, felt like they belonged to someone else. None of it seemed real anymore. The fantasy she had built in her mind shattered as quickly as the moment she caught them together. All her trust had evaporated in the blink of an eye. The weight of the betrayal was suffocating. But why had she done it? The question lingered, unanswered, as the shadows of the night continued to haunt her. The love she thought she had for Mark felt so far away now, replaced by an overwhelming fury that she couldn't control. Emily's hands trembled as she recalled the moment when everything had spiraled out of control. When she had walked into that room, expecting to be with her new husband, but instead had found him and Jason entwined in a way that shattered her entire world. Was she wrong for reacting like this? Was there a way back? As the hours crawled by, Emily's reflection turned inward, realizing that her future would never be the same again. The once promising life she had dreamed of, filled with love, family, and happiness, was now reduced to a courtroom and hospital rooms. Her own actions, driven by the deepest of betrayals, had sealed her fate. The sense of guilt and shame was suffocating, but beneath it, there was a brutal clarity. Her life, Mark's life, and Jason's life were forever altered by one explosive moment, one snap that had turned everything upside down. The news of the incident spread beyond their small town. Headlines screamed of the bride who had turned violent, of a marriage that ended before it even began. But to Emily, it wasn't about the headlines. It was about the silence that followed, the empty space where love had once resided. The anger, the hurt, and the deep betrayal had cost them everything. And as she sat in that cell, the truth was undeniable. There was no going back. All she could do now was wait, caught between regret and rage, as her fate, and the fate of the man she once called her husband, hung in the balance. What would you have done if you were in Emily's shoes? How would you have reacted to such a devastating betrayal? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you want to hear more gripping true crime stories like this, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Don't miss out on our latest updates. Stay tuned for more shocking and emotional stories.